Bottom line is I needed money. I had an apartment in Studio City, $140 a month. It's probably about $2,000 a month now, but back then it was $140 for a one bedroom, and it was a nice place. It wasn't a dump. It was furnished, and it had a pool, it had everything it possibly could want, and it was close to the studios and close to Hollywood. And it was quiet. It was on a street that was quiet. And until the time someone shot a bullet through my door, but I'll tell that later. So anyway, I was at this place, and I needed money to feed my I got to eat habit, okay? And I didn't want to get thrown out or evicted. So I was there with my car from back east, and I was going on job interviews all the time, but I went to one on Hollywood Boulevard, and there's that big, iconic bookstore, magazine shop at the corner of Cahuenga and Hollywood. And I was walking by there to a place, and I happened to see Fangoria, issue number 1 on the stands. I said, wow, what's this? Because I'm, a big Monster fan already. And I open it up, I say, wow, this is not bad. I bought it. I think it was $1.95. I took it to my interview, which panned out to be nothing. And I read it, and I said, geez, this is going to be an interesting magazine. They probably pay for articles. And so I called. Back then I couldn't call. I didn't have enough money to call New York. Okay, I was that broke. So I wrote to Bob Martin, who was the listed editor of Fangoria. And I said, I'm out here, I work for a special effects company, lie. And that I had close contacts with a lot of sci-fi people, lie. And that I could do some great interviews and reviews, lie. And he said, well, let's see who can you do? And I just thought about people in credits. And I started listing people off that I'd seen before in recent credits. And he says, well, can you do Chris Walas? I said, sure, I can do Chris Walas. And you can supplement it with some photos? Absolutely. He's got tons of them. Lie. And so what happened was I hung up and I said, oh my God, what am I going to do? That's probably something I shouldn't do, but I need the money. Because he paid $150 for an article, which to me was a month's rent and, 3 Whoppers at Burger King. And I said, okay, I'll trade you a Whopper for a Whopper, okay? And my Whopper is, I know Chris Walas, and I know how he works and everything else. So I wrote this interview at my kitchen table. Uh-oh.
They pause. Okay, damn.
So anyway, after seeing Fangoria, I said, okay, I can write monster stuff. I'd actually written already for Monster Times here in New York when I was there. And I said, I'm going to write to Bob Martin, the listed editor on Fangoria. And I told him all this garbage about knowing people and that I worked for a special effects firm and everything else. Lies. And he said, well, do Chris Walas first. And I said, okay, great. I'll just call him up. And I hung up and I said, how am I going to call him up? I don't know his number and I don't know him. And who the hell is he going to think of me when I just call out of the blue? Even if I did have his number. So I said, I can interview him without all that hassle and driving. I just took a garbage bag out of, my grocery bag out of, I used for my garbage, was under the sink. I pulled one out. I ripped it up into a long piece of paper. I took my pen and I wrote out an interview with Chris Walas. I made him sound great. I made him sound like he was like God's gift, okay? And I then went to a local library that rented typewriters. You couldn't take them out, but you could type there. And they had a thing called study hall, and they had a typewriter. You can rent for nothing. So I bought some paper, and I typed up this article I said, wow, here it is. It looks pretty damn good on real paper, typed up. And I said, well, how am I going to get some pictures? There was no internet, nothing. The internet was like, oh my God, the internet was like more than like 20 years away. And I said, what am I going to do? So I'm bemoaning the fact that I have the article, but I don't have the photos. And back then, on Hollywood Boulevard, there were bookstores that catered to movie buffs and tourists by putting out stills in a big container or a barrel in front of the store when the store was open to get you to look at these stills and then maybe come in and buy something. And the stills were like $3 for $1. And they usually were stills that no one even would want. There was just the studio personnel would throw the stills at these people for pennies, and then they'd put them in these barrels for $3 for $1. So if you knew what you were looking for and you had the time and the effort to look for them, you could go to store to store to store and maybe find some stills. But there were no stills of Chris Walas stuff or Chris Walas himself that I could find, even though I looked. So I was at the pool, and there was these two hot chicks just sunning themselves, and I was bemoaning what I was telling them the story, and the girl, one of the girls, the smarter one, says, "Why don't you just call that newspaper that caters to show business?" And I went, "Wow, ingenious, good idea." So I left, and I went back. There's no cell phones anymore. Still no more cell phones. They haven't even come along yet. I went back to my apartment, picked up the rotary phone, and I dialed Variety. And I got shunted from person to person to person to person. Finally, someone answers my question. Can you tell me if what Chris Walas is working on? And they said, just a minute. And they came back. Oh, he's working on some pilot for CBS. I said, do you have any photos? And they said, more than we can use. I said, can I have a couple? And they said, sure. You can have 10 of them if you want. I said, great. Do I have to come down? And he says, no, I'll mail them to you. So I gave him my address. I'm jumping up and down. And I gave him my address, and like 2 days later, it shows up. I'm looking at these photos. I said, these are great. And I'm actually delivering on what the article is saying. And so I repackaged the stills with my typewritten pages, and I sent it off express mail, which was only $4 back then, to Bob Martin at Fangoria. And I said, I hope he likes it. Anyway, I go out, I'm doing interviews and stuff like that to get jobs. And then I come back home, and there's a recorded message on my phone mate. This is when phone mates still had a little cassette inside. And he says, great work on the Chris Walas thing. Call me tomorrow. Let's get you on some other stuff. Okay? I said, wow, I just made $150. And my article sold. I'm going to be hog heaven. So I didn't want to call him because back then, long distance rates were astronomical. Boy, you kids have it easy. Anyway, I gave up my lunch money to call Bob Martin in New York. And he sets me a go with all kinds of interviews. And I said, okay, great, I'll get on those tomorrow. And I realized at that point that I was hog heaven bound, because I'm going to be making a lot of money writing these bogus articles for Fangoria. And even if I don't get a job in the movies, well, I'm gonna have my rent paid up through December. And it happened that way. At one point, I had 3 articles in one issue, early issue. And I was just knocking them out. And that was $450 that paid a lot of bills back then. Okay? Now that's nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. But back then, I was doing great. I could afford to eat out and have a good old time and go to a real restaurant occasionally. So I started doing that. Then I went to one of these, again, bookstores on Hollywood Boulevard, and I found some stills from the new Lucio Fulci movie, Zombie. And I said, oh, these are great. And I called the guy whose number was on the back. His name was Vince Emery. And I said, can you send me some, I left a message for him. I said, can you send me a couple of transparencies? Because I work for Fangoria, okay? So later on, I get a message back from a guy named Ben Samurai, okay? And Ben Samurai is the garbled name of Vince Emery. Because Vince Emery called me and says, oh, this is Ben Samurai. And I guess he said Vince Emery, but it turned out that I heard him as Ben Samurai. So I called back Hemisphere Pictures, or Jerry Gross Pictures, and I said, let me speak to Ben Samurai. And then they said, do you mean Vince Emery? And I said, oh, that's it, Vince Emery. And so Vince gets on, he says, oh, it's great that you call. We want to promote this film. Come on in, I'll set up a screening for you and your friends. So we went to a screening. Chuck and Dave and all my good buddies went. And they gave me, they gave me some transparencies, which became the cover of, I think, Fangoria number 8, I think. And I said, how do I make this special? And my buddy Dave, at that point, says, why don't you interview Lucio Fulci? And I said, that's a great idea. So I went back to the same breakfast nook with another paper bag, and I interviewed Lucio Fulci with an Italian interpreter. And they bought it all. They bought it all. I made, between issues 2 and 11, I think I had stories in each, at least 2 per issue. And I had 2 covers, because I interviewed Stanley Kubrick for The Shining 6 months before the film came out. And I told him that he ran it for me in a special Warner Brothers screening room, and it was a funny story. I mean, it was a good story, and they bought it. They put it out, and they listed it as truth. And of course, around issue 11, somebody from Warner Brothers, some big shot from Warner Brothers, called Fangoria and said, where did you get those facts in the Shining interview? And they said, who wants to know? And they said, well, Stanley Kubrick's office wants to know. And at that point, it all fell apart. They called the other people who I supposedly interviewed, and they all said, we never met this guy. And I didn't write anything derogatory about these people. I just wrote about them and made things up, about their lives and everything else that just didn't have anything to do with reality. And one guy, Rob Bottin, was pissed about some of the things I said, because he said they're just not true. And of course, that's when Bob Martin got on the phone with me and said, don't ever call here again. You're done. I said, okay, well, it's over, it's over. They didn't sue me. They didn't want the money back, but they didn't hire me again after that. And
yes, they did.
Except they just did. 40 years later, I wrote a little post-it. I saw it in Facebook. They read an article about their new podcast was all about Chopping Mall, which they trashed when it first came out. And I said, well, I guess I'm half forgiven for my transgressions at Fangoria. And it was a long post, but it got a lot of attention and likes on Facebook. And people would say, what happened? And I said, oh, well, I told them some bogus stories back in the day. And of course, they got onto there's a guy named Phil Nobile, who's now editor of the magazine. I didn't send it to him, but somebody else sent it to him. He saw it, got a hold of me, and said, "Could you write this up?" And what they're paying now is much more appropriate than what I got paid then. So I wrote a 6-page article and discussed it, in detail. I still lied a little bit, but not a lot. So anyway, I think that's getting published in the next issue.
What do you think the biggest fib was out of all those articles?
Oh my God, they're all bullshit. That's the only way to describe them. They're all bullshit. I mean, going to Stanley Kubrick's private screening room to see The Shining 6 months before it came out, before it was even finished, asking Lucio Fulci telling me how he went down to shoot that shark versus zombie scene. I made it all up. I said, this sounds exciting and entertaining. I made it all up. I didn't care. I said, who's gonna, Lucio Fulci's not gonna come after me. And even if he does, it's just gonna be in fun. So, and I never said anything bad about these people. I just said, okay. Rob Bottin actually wasn't that pissed. He said he was a little put off by the fact that that I had said it, but I ended up working with him and hiring him a couple of times when I got my job with Roger Corman, which happened coincidentally just as I was getting kicked off of Fangoria. I got a call and I got a job working with Herbert B. Leonard, who had produced Rin Tin Tin, Route 66, and a number of other hit shows from the past. And he was living in a mansion in, Hollywood Hills. And I went to work for him. I went to work with him on a sci-fi pilot called Starstruck, and which my buddy Chuck Serino was involved with. And that's where I also recommended Chris Walas and Rob Bottin, who were both hired for that show. And they created monsters and stuff. The only thing bad with that was the person who wrote it and directed it were two people who had no idea what they were doing. The writer was a famous Broadway playwright named Arthur Kopit, and who had done all these great plays, but he ripped off Star Wars, right down to the robot and everything else, and the aliens in a bar. Come on. And I wanted to tell Herbert B. Leonard that they were going to get, if not sued, people are going to see this as a blatant ripoff. But he went ahead and made it anyway. And it didn't sell. It was a pilot that went unsold. And I don't think anybody would have ever bought this thing. But he liked what I did because I brought in all these people, and he hired me for his new pilot for Breaking Away, based on the Fox film. And it was going to star Sean Cassidy. So I was a location manager. I got sent to Georgia, where I started locationing at the campus of Athens, the Athens College. And coincidentally, with my arrival there, a bunch of obscene phone calls started being made to local girls at the sorority houses. And it wasn't me. I swear to God it wasn't me. Anyway, I meet some friends there, and I said, well, I'm cooking now. I'm working for Fox now. And then suddenly I wasn't. Fox turned around and said, get rid of this guy. He's making the obscene phone calls. Now, they had no proof at all, and I certainly didn't do it. But Herbert B. comes up to me and he says, I got to let you go. And he let me go. And I said, don't tell anybody about this. And he said, I'm not. I know it's not you. So he gives me 2 weeks advance pay, puts me on a plane back to LA, and gives me a first class ticket. And I'm still bemoaning that. Here I am, I got 2 weeks pay, which was good pay, and I got a first class ticket. But I'm still going back to nothing when I thought I was starting something. And on the plane, I'm telling the story to a woman who's sitting next to me, and she says, my husband knows Roger Corman. Maybe he can get you in there. I said, that would be so great. That would be so great. He says, well, here's my phone number. Call me when you get back to LA. So I called her, and she put me on with her husband, a guy named Jay Weston, who had produced films called like Underground Aces and Lady Sings the Blues. Just, a good guy. And he got me an interview with Roger. And I walked into Roger's place, and that particular day, he had lost his publicity director. And he saw all the work I'd done at Doubleday. And he said, you're hired. And if I hadn't been on that plane, I hadn't been fired, and all that, I would have never met Roger Corman. So life works in strange ways. I met Roger. I took the job. I would have taken any job, but he offered me a good one for good money. And I went out, got drunk at the bar next door, and I went to work the following Monday. And I did all the stuff at the advertising directors. I made posters, I made radio spots, I did newspaper ads, did everything you can do. And so that's how it began. All right, so I just got asked about my early works. I did 3 films in college, none of which I'm ever going to release or show to anybody, including you. And
I saw them.
well, some people have seen them, but not many, and I thank God for that. When I first went to college, I took up with the film school. I said, well, I could learn how to make films here. And I didn't learn anything. Did not learn anything. But they said, well, you learn by working and creating your own movie. So I did this 1 5-minute movie called Turn Down Day, which is a kid who tries to enroll in a college and gets turned down. And I did it, not silent, but I shot this kid coming on a train, going to the admissions, and people shaking their heads. There was no sound. I didn't have sound. And then he gets back he's dejected and gets back on the train and rides away. And I scored it with the main theme by John Barry to Midnight Cowboy, which is this mournful harmonica theme. And they ran it at the film school presentation at the college. Everybody's films get shown. And it ran and got some polite applause. And I said, oh, this is wrong. This is really wrong. I didn't entertain anybody, including myself. How boring was that? So I said, well, let's make a horror movie next. And so I did what would be considered a reality horror movie, like Blair Witch or Blair Witch. And it was about serial killings at local colleges. And I called it The Co-Ed Killer. And I got newsmen and all these people to talk about it on camera. And I cut it up into a little montage, like a news story. And at the very end, I have someone killed. And it was, they were writing the names of the college they were going to strike next that into the back of their victims. And it was, if I had the gore and the ability to do that, it was in black and white. And I said, well, at least this will get some attention. Well, everybody banned it, okay? It would not show at the local college film festival. They said, we can't show this. It's really gross. And so I had my own screening. I had a girl that worked on the newspaper, and she put a full-page ad for the movie 2 days after the film festival. And more people showed up for my movie than showed up for the entire film festival. And we ran The Co-Ed Killer. It got applause. It was funny. And it inspired me to make one more movie called Johnny Rhodes' Private Eye. I said, I want to do a full-fledged action movie. And I got thrown in jail. I got thrown in jail. We went out to try to do a car chase on a freeway, on a Long Island local freeway, and we were going up exit ramps, driving up, and the cops stopped us. And my buddies and I all got taken to jail in Freeport, okay? And I said, but we didn't steal this equipment. It belongs to Adelphi University. I should have said that. They'll probably sue me now. But anyway, we made Johnny Rhodes' Private Eye, full-fledged car chases, girls with big boobs, and a kind of a James Bondian character named Johnny Rhodes. And it was partially sound, and partially we put, the car chase didn't have sound. We put revving engines and stuff. And I scored it with Santana, of all things, okay? I got Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, and Santana to score it with some records. And I had a great time making it. And again, that played to a big standing ovation at college. And that's when I said, well, I've done my film stuff. And they were not good films. They were just, like something Al Adamson would have done. And so when I got to Doubleday and I started doing these little ads for TV, there was a guy there who gave me a real insight into how to make a movie. And we did like over the shoulder sometimes with authors and things. And I saw how it was done, finally. And so it gave me a little insight into how to make a movie. And then when I made my first movie, which is The Lost Empire, I hired a very, very knowledgeable director of photography named Jacques Haken, who had shot the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and everything else, to be my director of photography. And he taught me how to do stuff. And he taught me about cheating and everything else. And then when I did Chopping Ball, Roger Corman took me out to lunch, 2.5-hour lunch. He said, bring a notepad with you. And he took me out to lunch. We had a nice lunch for about 40 minutes. And then he said, okay, now it's time to learn something. And he gave me his entire insight in the next 2 hours. And it was a lot to absorb. He said, you got to write all this down and study it. And I did. And I still have that pad because it was like everything that they don't teach you at film school. What to do if it rains. What to do if an actor doesn't show up. What to do if you're stuck boxed into a corner. How do you make that look good? How do you make a white wall look good? How do you do this? How do you do that? Everything you needed to know to make a good film with a modest budget. And I learned a lot from that. And I employed that notepad a lot when I made Chopping Mall. I knew exactly what I was going to do every day. I knew where to put the camera. And it was all because of that 2-hour film school that was better than any film school I ever had. So I got to thank Roger for that. He gave me a lot of insight and training on how to make a good movie fast and without making a mistake.